The jungle was too quiet. Ethan paused, holding his breath as the wind blew through tall, dark trees with glowing blue leaves. He had traveled far from his shuttle, looking for rare crystals on this unknown alien world. His scanner was quiet, but his instincts were not. Then it came, a scream, sharp and full of pain, echoed through the jungle. It was not the sound of an animal, not the roar of a beast, but something else, something alive, something in pain, something intelligent. Ethan turned his head fast, heart beating like a drum. He looked around, checking the thick alien bushes, the massive roots curled like snakes, the trees twisting into the dark sky. The scream came again, louder this time, more desperate. It sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't supposed to go off route, not alone, but he couldn't ignore it. Gripping his pulse rifle tightly, Ethan moved slowly toward the sound. Every step forward was like walking into a nightmare. Strange eyes blinked from the shadows. Alien insects hissed and crawled along glowing bark. Still, he walked, his boots crushed. Bones he didn't recognize long, twisted shapes that didn't belong to any animal he knew. And then he smelled its smoke, and something else. Burning flesh. Ethan crouched low, creeping through vines and leaves until he reached a hill looking down into a strange, open clearing. What he saw below made his breath freeze. There were creatures. Down there, tribal aliens with painted skin, feathers, and sharp teeth. They danced around a fire, beating drums made from bones and stretched skin. And above the flames, tied by her wrists and ankles, was a young alien girl. She was hanging from a wooden pole, slowly being lowered toward the fire. Her skin was pale and marked with burns, her face twisted in pain. She screamed again as the flames licked her legs, and the tribal aliens laughed and shouted words he couldn't understand. Ethan's hands tightened around his rifle. He could just turn around, walk away, tell himself it wasn't his problem. But then the girl lifted her head. Weak and trembling, their eyes met, even from a distance. Ethan could see her eyes were full of terror and pleading. She was begging for help, for mercy, for someone to care, for anyone. For him, he cursed under his breath. "Why me?" he muttered. He checked his gear. He had one flare, 2 stun grenades, low energy in his rifle, and no backup. Still, he couldn't leave her like that. He moved back into the jungle, heart racing, planning fast. He would distract the tribes with a flash, then cut her down while they were blinded. He only had one chance. No mistakes. He took a deep breath, looked up at the red moons glowing above, and whispered, "Hang on, girl. I'm coming." Back in the clearing, the tribe began chanting louder. They lowered the girl closer. Her skin began to blacken, and her screams grew weaker. They were killing her slowly, enjoying it, but then bunga flash of blinding light shot. Across the clearing, screams erupted as the flare exploded, burning white in the sky like a miniature sun. Ethan dashed in from the shadows. Throwing a stun grenade to the left, boom, 3 aliens dropped to the ground. Dazed, he reached the girl. In seconds, cutting the ropes with his survival knife. She fell into his arms, barely conscious. "Got you," he whispered. But now the others saw him. They roared, charging with spears and bone knives raised. Ethan turned and ran. He fired a few warning shots behind him, not to kill, just to slow them down. He could hear the sound of feet stomping the ground, the war cries chasing him like a storm. The jungle swallowed him again as he ran. The girl clutched in his arms. Vines scratched him. Roots tried to trip him, but he didn't stop. She was breathing shallow but steady. He could feel her shaking against his chest. "Just hold on," he whispered, more to himself than her. The tribal screams faded behind him, but he knew they weren't done. They would follow. They would hunt, and he had just made himself their #1 enemy. But Ethan didn't care, because tonight he had heard a scream in the jungle, and he had answered it. Ethan didn't stop running until his lungs burned like fire. Branches slapped his face. Thorns tore at his jacket. But he held the alien girl tightly in his arms. The jungle was thick, dark, and alive with strange sounds. But nothing scared him more than the angry tribal chants still echoing far behind. She was light in his arms, too light. Her skin was covered in blisters. Her breath was soft and shallow. Ethan knew if he didn't treat her soon, she wouldn't survive the night. He found a small cave hidden under hanging vines and ducked inside. It was damp and smelled of moss, but it was shelter. He gently laid the girl down on a patch of moss and quickly lit a small fire. Her body shivered, her eyes closed tight, lips cracked and dry. He took out his field med kit. Pouring a cooling gel over her burns, the girl flinched in pain, but didn't scream this time. Her voice was gone, stolen by the fire and her cries for help. Ethan took off his jacket and covered her thin frame. He offered her a sip from his water. Flask, her hands were weak, shaking, but she tried to drink. "Easy," he said softly, helping her tilt her head. After a while, she opened her eyes, large, violet, and full of confusion. She stared at him like he was something impossible. "Why?" She croaked, her voice dry like broken glass. "Why save me?" Human. Ethan looked at her and didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. He just shook his head and said, "I couldn't let them burn you." She blinked, trying to process his words. Then tears welled up in her eyes. She turned her face away. As if ashamed to cry in front of him, Ethan sat beside her, not touching, just watching the fire crackle. The night grew colder, and the jungle outside howled with distant calls. She finally whispered again, They call me food," Ethan frowned. "What?" She pointed to herself weakly to them. "A person. Just food." Ethan's fists clenched. He had heard rumors about wild tribes on certain planets, how they offered sacrifices to their gods or roasted enemies alive, but seeing it happen, to someone so young and aware it, twisted his gut. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then said Kiara. It was a soft name, but it carried weight. "Kiara," he repeated. "I'm Ethan." She nodded slowly, as if memorizing the sound. "Thank you." "Ethan," she whispered. He smiled faintly, then looked at her injuries again. Her arms had rope burns, deep and red. Her back had blackened skin where she'd been closest to the fire. He winced at the damage and worked carefully, applying gel and bandages where he could. She watched him in silence. "Why were you there?" he asked after a moment. Kiara looked away again, eyes filled with old pain. "Taken from my people," she said. "Sold to Forest Tribe." Ethan's brows drew together. "Sold," she nodded. "My clan peaceful. No warriors left. Tribe attacked. I was gift to forest gods." Ethan felt something boil inside him. A girl. Like her, intelligent, peaceful, left to be eaten like some ritual meat. "Not anymore," he said. "You're safe now." She shook her head weakly. "No safe. They hunt." "Always hunt." Ethan looked toward the cave entrance. The flickering shadows just beyond the firelight. She was right. They weren't done yet. And if they found her missing, they'd come with spears, fire, and rage. "We need to move tomorrow," he said. "Get you somewhere safe." Kiara looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Why do you help me?" she asked again. "You risk life." Ethan didn't know what to say. He thought about the scream he heard, the moment their eyes met over. The fire. And he said the only truth he could find, because no one else did. Kiara stared at him for a long time. Then she gave the smallest nod, one tear slipping down her alien cheek. The fire crackled quietly between them as the night wore on, outside. The tribal drums had faded, but the danger was still alive in the darkness. Ethan stayed awake, rifle in his hands, eyes on the shadows. Kiara fell into a light sleep, her breathing slow and fragile, But even in her dreams, her face twitched in fear. She had been through a nightmare, and Ethan knew it was far from over. But for now, she had warmth, water, and someone willing to fight for her. And that, for Kiara, was more than she ever hoped for again. The morning air was heavy and hot. A fog settled low in the jungle. Hiding everything more than a few steps ahead, Ethan stood just outside the cave. Watching the jungle breathe, every leaf moved with suspicion. Every bird call felt like a warning. Behind him, Kiara lay curled in the jacket he gave her, still sleeping but breathing better now. Her skin was healing slowly under the med patches, though her body was still weak. Ethan didn't rest the whole night. He sat with his rifle in his hands, listening to the jungle, ready for anything. And now, as the red sun rose through the thick branches, he knew their time had run out. Kiara stirred behind him, eyes slowly opening. She whispered his name. Ethan, he turned back and gave her a calm nod. We have to move, Kiara. Now, she sat up with effort, every muscle trembling. I can't run, she said softly. I know, Ethan replied, so I'll carry you. She blinked at him, confused. But why? Ethan smiled gently. Because I won't leave you behind. He helped her to her feet, then crouched down. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly climbed onto his back, her arms wrapping weakly around his neck. He stood, adjusting her weight carefully, then began moving through the thick trees once again. The jungle was different now. It wasn't just trees. And Dirteet was alive with watchers. Ethan felt eyes on him from every side. He moved carefully, avoiding loud steps and sticking close to shadows, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. They were being hunted. He saw it in broken branches, fresh footprints, and painted symbols left behind. On the trees, they were close. Kiara felt it too. Her grip around him tightened every time a twig snapped or a bird flew away suddenly. They don't forgive, she whispered into his ear. They take back what is theirs. Well, Ethan replied, they can try. He found a ridge overlooking a stream and paused to catch his breath. Kiara slid off his back for a moment, her legs shaky but standing. She looked at him, her eyes still tired, but something had changed. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was angry. They hunted me like animals, she said, but I am not meat. No, Ethan said. You're a survivor. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke through the jungle, followed by the sound of war drums. They found the trail. They come, Kiara whispered. Ethan grabbed her hand and ran down the ridge, across the stream. Through thorny bushes and low-hanging branches, behind them, the sounds grew louder, stomping feet, shouting voices, cracking trees. Ethan glanced back and saw figures jumping through trees with spears and feathers flying. Keep going, he shouted. Kiara stumbled, but he caught her, lifting her back onto his back and running again, ahead. He saw an old ruina, half-buried structure made from stone and metal, maybe from another colony long ago. He rushed inside, placing Kiara in a shadowed corner. Stay here, no matter what, he said. She grabbed his wrist, fear in her voice. What will you do? He looked at her. Then at the entrance, by time before she could speak again, he stepped out. Drawing the attackers toward him, they came fast, 6 of them, covered in red paint, eyes wild with rage. Ethan threw one stun grenade, then another. Boom. 2 went down hard, twitching on the ground. The others kept coming. Ethan fired a warning shot, then another, trying to keep them at a distance. But one got close, slashing with a jagged bone blade. Ethan blocked it with his rifle, then punched the attacker in the face, knocking him back. But another one leaped onto his back, stabbing at him with a sharpened stick. Ethan rolled and slammed the attacker into the ground, breathing hard, blood on his arm. Then, just when he thought he was finished, a sharp scream cut through the air. Not his, Kiara's. She had stepped out of the shadows, holding a glowing stone in her hand. Eyes blazing, she threw it into the air, and a blinding light filled the ruins. Forcing the attackers to cover their faces, Ethan grabbed her hand, and together they ran again, this time deeper into the ruins, down a staircase made of cracked stone. Behind them, the tribal hunters shouted in anger, but didn't follow right away. In the silence, Ethan turned to Kiara, shocked. What was that stone? She smiled weakly. Old tech. From my people. Emergency flare. You saved me, he said with surprise. She nodded. You saved me first. They sat in the cold, dark hallway, catching their breath. Kiara leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the jungle was still dangerous, and the tribes were still hunting, but for now, inside the old ruins. Ethan and Kiara had found something rare in this world. A chance to survive together. The cave was quiet but not peaceful. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow taps, echoing through the stone chamber like a ticking clock. Ethan and Kiara sat side by side, backs resting against the cold wall of the ancient ruin. Their bodies were sore, their clothes torn, and their minds still spinning from the run through the jungle. Ethan stared at the entrance, watching for shadows. Always alert, Kiara sat beside him, legs pulled close to her chest, her skin still wrapped in bandages and burns, but now her eyes held more than pain, they held questions. Will they come here? She asked softly. Ethan shook his head slowly. Not yet. They fear old places. Kiara glanced at the stone walls. Strange faded markings dancing in the firelight. What is this place? She asked. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and looked around. Maybe a research site? He said. A long time ago, humans or someone else built this. Kiara touched a wall gently, running her fingers over a broken symbol. Feels old but alive, she whispered. He nodded, like it remembers. They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind outside and the strange hum beneath the stone. Then Kiara turned toward him. Why did you not leave me? She asked. Again, you had no reason to stay. Ethan sighed. He looked at her with tired eyes. I heard your scream, he said, and something in me said, don't walk away. Kiara blinked, confused, even if it meant death. Yes. He answered without pause. Even then, she looked down, her voice shaking. No one ever did that for me. Ethan wanted to say something comforting, but he stayed quiet, sometimes. Silence was the only true answer. Kiara shifted closer. Her arm brushing his, she didn't pull away. Back in my village, she began, I was just a girl. Not strong, not important, but you are alive, Ethan said. And you are still here. She smiled faintly. Because of you, Ethan stood up and walked around the room. Checking for other exits, he found a side tunnel, narrow and dark, but safe. He returned to Kiara. We'll move at dawn, he said. This place is only a hiding spot, not a home. She nodded. Though her body looked ready to collapse again, he gave her one of his protein rations. She sniffed it and laughed. Weakly. Smells like metal. Tastes worse. He chuckled, but it helps. She took a bite, chewing slowly. Then looked at him again. You're different, she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. How so? You don't treat me like prey, she said. You treat me like a person. He leaned back against the wall again, letting out a deep breath. I don't see a slave or a sacrifice, he said. I see someone who didn't deserve what happened. Kiara looked at him with something deeper in her eyes. Something between trust and wonder. No human ever came this deep, she whispered. They say your kind doesn't care. Maybe they say the same about yours, he replied. She smiled again. A small but honest smile for a moment. They were no longer from two different species, two different worlds. They were just two souls trying to survive. A rumble shook the cave floor beneath them. They both froze. Ethan grabbed his rifle, listening closely, but it wasn't footsteps. It was something deeper. Earthquake, Kiara whispered. No, Ethan replied. Something's moving below us. He looked at the stone tiles again. Now, seeing the cracks running in a pattern like doors, suddenly, the wall near them lit up with a faint blue glow. Kiara stood, her eyes wide. That symbol. It's from my clan. The glow formed a shape, a handprint. Glowing bright, without thinking, Kiara walked to it and pressed her hand against the wall. The light pulsed and faded. Then the wall creaked and opened slowly. Behind it was a small chamber filled with old tech and glowing crystals. Ethan stepped inside, amazed. This is not human. He said, It's my ancestors' vault, Kiara whispered. They were builders. Protectors. She picked up a small object, shaped like a teardrop with light swirling inside, a memory crystal. She said softly, It holds truth. Proof of who I am. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Who are you? Kiara held the crystal tightly. I am not just a girl, Ethan, she said. I am heir to the lost builders. And they feared me because of that. Ethan realized now this wasn't just a rescue mission. This was bigger. The tribes wanted to erase her, to destroy a bloodline that threatened their rule. But now, she had proof, and he had a reason to fight. Harder. We'll get you out, he said firmly. No matter what it takes, Kiara nodded, her voice full of something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. And as they stood together inside the hidden chamber, the jungle beyond the cave didn't feel so terrifying anymore. Ethan stared at the glowing memory crystal in Kiara's hands. The swirling light inside it felt alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. He had seen many alien artifacts in his life, but none like this. None that reacted to touch, none that whispered in strange languages only the holder could understand. Kiara held it close, like it was part of her body, part of her blood. This crystal, she whispered, has been inside my family for generations. She sat down carefully on the cold floor of the hidden chamber, still weak from her injuries. My mother gave it to me the night before we were attacked, she said. It will guide me when I have nothing else. Ethan crouched beside her, watching her face closely. What's inside? He asked. Kiara touched the side of the crystal, and a soft light glowed from its surface. Then a hologram appeared in the air above it, a woman tall, elegant, with markings like Kiara spoke in a gentle alien tongue. Kiara translated slowly, her voice trembling. She says, The tribes were once united under the builders. We shared knowledge, built cities in trees and in stars. But then jealousy came. The wild ones turned against us, destroyed everything they could not understand. Ethan listened, trying to understand the scale of what he was hearing. Your people were scientists, he said. Leaders. Kiara nodded, and now? They are forgotten. She pointed to the hologram's final words. This crystal proves I am one of them. Ethan looked at her, serious now. You said they hunted you. Because of this, yes, she whispered. If I live, I become a symbol of the past they tried to erase. Ethan stood up, pacing slowly in the small chamber. He felt a heavy weight pressed down on his chest. This wasn't just about saving a girl anymore. This was about history, justice, and survival on AE. Galactic level, you can't just run forever. He said, you need protection, real protection. Kiara looked up at him with tired eyes. Who will protect a girl with burned skin and hunted blood? Ethan turned to her, firm and clear. I will. She blinked, stunned. You alone? I'm not alone, he said. I have contacts, ships, and friends that owe me favors. I'll get you to the nearest station, he added. We'll show this crystal to the Galactic Council. Kiara lowered her head, her voice cracking. They will try to stop us before we get there. Ethan stepped closer, kneeling in front of her. Let them try. Kiara placed the crystal in a pouch and tied it around her neck. "It's not just proof," she said. "It's power. And if it breaks, I do too." Ethan gently touched her hand. "Then we'll keep it safe." Suddenly, the walls of the ruin groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the floor rumbled softly beneath their feet. Ethan stood, eyes scanning the walls. "They're here." Kiara reached for her dagger, the only weapon she had left. Ethan shook his head, handing her a small blaster instead. "Use this." She looked at the weapon in her hands, nervous. "I've never fired one." "You might have to learn quick," he said. They exited the hidden chamber and moved carefully through the broken hallways of the ruin, outside the cave entrance. Leaves rustled unnaturally. Ethan held up a hand, motioning for silence. Then whoosh, a spear shot past them, barely missing Kiara's arm. They ducked behind an old stone pillar as more projectiles flew through the air. "We have to move," Ethan said. "They're closing in." Kiara breathed fast, clutching the blaster tightly. "I don't want to die with this truth still hidden," she said. "You won't," Ethan replied. "Not today." He pulled out his last flash device, a small metal ball no bigger than his thumb. "When I throw this, run." To that ridge he pointed. "It leads to the river canyon. Once we're there, I'll call in a dropship." She nodded, trusting him completely now. He counted to 3. Then through the flash hard across the jungle floor, boom, a blinding white light flashed, followed by screams of confusion from the tribal aliens. Ethan and Kiara ran fast, dodging branches and sliding down wet hills. Behind them, angry voices shouted, but the jungle slowed the hunters down. Ethan pushed through with all his strength, Kiara right behind him. Finally, they reached the edge of the cliff. Below them, a wide river rushed through a narrow canyon. "We jump," Ethan said without hesitation. Kiara froze. "It's too high." "It's our only chance," he said. She looked at the drop, then at him, then nodded with a trembling breath. "Together," she whispered. He took her hand. "Together." And they leaped into the roaring water below. The water hit them like a punch from a beast. Cold, wild, and angry, Ethan and Kiara plunged deep into the rushing river, dragged by the pliant Klee. By the current through sharp rocks and foam, Ethan struggled to hold on to Kiara, feeling her hand slipping in his, but she fought too, kicking and reaching for him again as the river pulled them apart. Finally, after what felt like forever, they were thrown against a bank of soft mud and slippery stones, coughing and gasping. Ethan pulled Kiara out of the water and dragged her under a large fallen tree. They lay there, wet and shaking, catching their breath as the river roared behind them. "Are you okay?" he asked between breaths. Kiara nodded weakly, coughing up water. "Still alive, that's what matters," Ethan said, leaning his head back against the bark. Above them, the sky was changing. Dark clouds rolled over the jungle, and the wind began to howl like a warning. A storm was coming, and so were the hunters. "They won't stop," Kiara whispered, her voice still hoarse. "They never stop." Ethan stared into the trees, jaw tight. "Let them come," he said quietly. "I'm done running." Kiara looked at him with wide eyes. "You want to fight them?" "Yes," he said. "They want to erase you because of your blood, because of that crystal, because you remind them of what they destroyed. They won't stop unless someone stops them first." She sat up slowly, bruised but stronger than before. "I never fought before," she said, "not with weapons." "Then you fight with your will," Ethan said, "with your truth." They didn't have long. The tribal drums echoed faintly through the trees again, steady, slow, like the heartbeat of a predator. Kiara stood and looked around, then pointed toward a cliffside path. "It leads to the old signal tower," she said. "It might still have power. If we can send a message, the Federation might hear us." Ethan nodded. Then we climb. The two moved through the jungle as fast as their tired bodies allowed. They stepped over roots, through thick vines, past ancient stones with carvings. Of a forgotten age, every sound made them turn. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper from the hunters. Kiara walked with a blaster in her hand now. She didn't look like prey anymore. She looked like someone ready to protect her story. At the edge of a high ridge, they found it. The old signal tower rusted, broken, but still standing like a proud memory of a time long gone. Ethan ran to the base. Brushing away moss and dirt from the control pad, "It's still here," he said. "Power's weak, but maybe enough." He pulled out his data link, connecting it to the system, fingers flying. Across the screen, Kiara kept watch, eyes on the jungle below. Then she froze. "Ethan," she whispered. He looked up. A dozen shapes moved through the tree's tribal warriors with war paint, spears, and torches. They had followed the river. They had found them again. Kiara raised the blaster, hands shaking. "But ready? They're close," she said. "I can smell their anger." Ethan activated the transmitter, a low hum rising from the tower. He quickly typed in a coda distress signal to any nearby human ships. Federation help needed. Coordinates. Attached, target, tribal death hunt. Innocent survivor present. The message was sent. Now they had to hold out. The first spear flew past them, striking the tower wall with a heavy thunk. Ethan ducked and returned fire, hitting the ground near their feet to scare them back. Kiara fired to her first shot wild. The second better, one of the warriors screamed and fell. They attacked again, this time from both sides. Ethan threw down his last stun charge, the shockwave sending 3 attackers to the ground, twitching. But more came, climbing up the rocks like insects driven by rage. Kiara stood in front of the tower now, shouting in her language. "I am Kiara of the Builders," she cried. "I carry the truth, and I will not burn." The warriors paused, confused by her words and her stance. Ethan used the moment to fire again, driving them back. Lightning cracked the sky, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The torches below went out, smoke rising into the stormy air. Then, above them, a sound louder than any drum filled the sky. A Federation dropship. Lights beamed down through the clouds, engines roaring. The tribal warriors screamed and scattered into the jungle, their courage broken. Kiara dropped her weapon, eyes wide with disbelief. "They came," she whispered. They really came. Ethan lowered his rifle and smiled through the rain. "Told you we'd make it." As the dropship landed nearby and soldiers poured out to secure the area, Kiara stepped closer to Ethan. Her voice was soft but firm. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You saved a history they tried to burn." He looked at her, soaked in rain and blood, and said, "No, Kiara, we saved it together." Rain poured from the sky like the planet was finally weeping for everything lost. The Federation dropship's engines hummed softly as soldiers in black and silver armor moved through the jungle clearing, securing the area with watchful eyes and ready rifles. Ethan sat on a rock just outside the signal tower, shoulder bleeding from a spear wound, but his face calm. He looked tired, bruised, and soaked but alive. Kiara stood beside him, her thin arms crossed tightly around her chest. Her eyes locked on the tree line even as the danger faded. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like someone who had survived something ancient and cruel and had come out standing. One of the soldiers approached Ethan, saluted, and handed him a med pack. "We received your distress signal just in time," the officer said. "You've got guts calling in from a no-fly zone like this." Ethan shrugged, didn't have much choice. The officer glanced at Kiara, eyes narrowing at her strange clothes and markings. "Who is she?" he asked. Ethan looked up slowly, then replied, "Her name is Kiara." and she carries the last memory of an entire civilization. The soldier didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and ordered the medics to help Ethan and scan Kiara gently when they tried to touch her. Kiara pulled back at first, but Ethan gave her a quiet nod and she let them clean her burns and check her vitals. "They tried to break me," she whispered to him as the medics worked. "They tried to cook me alive, I know," Ethan said, voice low. "But you're still here." After a few minutes, the soldiers cleared an area inside the ship for them. Ethan walked slowly up the ramp, one hand holding his bandaged arm, the other guiding Kiara gently. Inside, the hum of safety felt strange. Too clean, too bright, almost unreal after days in mud and blood. Kiara sat down near a window, staring out at the jungle that had nearly swallowed her forever. Ethan sat across from her, watching her more than the rain outside. "You changed," he said. Kiara looked at him, confused. "How?" "You're not the scared girl I found hanging over fire," he said. "You're something else now." She smiled faintly. "You gave me that strength." "No," Ethan replied. "You already had it." "I just saw it." The door to the cockpit opened, and the officer returned, holding a tablet. "We've analyzed the memory crystal," he said. "If this data is real, then she's more than a survivor. She's proof that the builders existed." He continued, and that the tribal clans destroyed them to steal power. Kiara stood slowly, her legs still sore, but steady. "Will they believe me?" she asked. The officer nodded. "They'll have to." Once this reaches the Galactic Council, Ethan leaned forward, serious now. "What happens to her?" he asked. "She will be placed under protection." The officer replied, "If she wishes, she can testify to the council and speak for her." People's truth. Kiara looked between them. Her voice was soft, but full of something strong. "I want to speak," she said, "not for revenge, but so no one else is ever burned for who they are." The officer gave a respectful bow and left them alone again. The ship began to rise gently, lifting them into the sky. Kiara looked down through the window at the jungle fading below. "I never thought I'd see the sky again," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "Well, now you can fly through it." She turned to him, her eyes full of quiet emotion. "You didn't have to save me," she said again. "But you did." Again and again. "I didn't do it for a reward," he said. "I did it because it was right." She walked closer and sat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, she placed her hand over his. "You could have left me," she said, "but instead, you gave me back my name, my voice, and my future." Ethan looked down at her hand resting in his. "You gave me something too," he said. "A reason to care again." The ship passed through the clouds and into open sky, stars slowly appearing. Through the fading rain, Kiara leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes slowly closing for the first real sleep in days. Ethan sat beside her, watching over her like he had since the night he followed her scream into the jungle. They had no idea what waited for them in the stars, but one thing was clear: they were no longer alone. They had fought side by side, bled together, and faced death as one. And from that pain and fire, something unbreakable had been forged between them, a bond not just of survival, but of trust, of truth, and of something deeper neither dared speak, yet hope.